Sunday, April 2nd, 1989 was a warm spring day in Princeton, New Jersey. For Sissy Stewart, that meant gardening, keeping up appearances around her stately home, as was expected in the affluent borough. But first, surely, there was time for Bloody Marys. Sissy Stewart, who was 74 but never acted her age and wasn't about to start, mixed a couple cocktails around lunchtime for herself and her good friend, Doris Mellinger. They sipped the drinks on antique furniture in her tidy living room. Sissy was a grande dame. She seemed to know everyone in town. Her family owned the local newspaper, and she had money. But you'd never know it looking at her that afternoon. She wore a t-shirt, sweater, and cuffed blue jeans with a strip of old cloth for a belt. She was frugal and fixed things instead of throwing them out. The glasses she wore for gardening were a wonder, held around her ears only with strips of wool tied to fishing weights. A little after 2 p.m. that day, Sissy said goodbye to her friend and headed out to tend to her yard on Mercer Street, a block from one of the most prestigious universities in the world.
As I recall, it was a nice sunny day.
This is Elias Bloxam Baker. He goes by Bloxy. He went to school with Sissy's sons, and their moms were friendly. That nice sunny day in 1989, a false alarm at the lumber yard he owned nearby brought him to Mercer Street around 4:30 or 5.
When it went off, the police would call me, and I would have to go down there and reset it, which entails coming into town, coming down Mercer Street, making a left down Alexander Street. And she was about 2 doors up from the corner, or maybe 3 doors. And she was out front, puttering around, doing her gardening and all that stuff. And I waved and went down to the lumber yard.
Later, to police, this sighting would be crucial, because Bloxy was the last person to see Sissy alive. Besides, of course, her killer. So you think you gave her a wave and...
That was it. And I made the left and went down to the lumber yard, and then when I came back going home, I don't recall seeing her.
While she worked, Sissy was in and out of her basement. Specifically the dank, dingy room where she kept her gardening tools. It was accessible by a few steps down under the side porch. There was a heavy door at the bottom, hidden in shadow. And it was in this room that Sissy Stewart was murdered. Someone stabbed her 5 times in the back with a small knife, then padlocked the exterior basement door, entombing her. The body of the grande dame grew cold as the sun set on this seemingly perfect Sunday. Sissy's son and daughter-in-law realized she was missing the next day and began searching for her. But they never checked the basement. Both cellar doors were locked from the outside, so someone would have had to lock her in there. And who would suspect foul play in a place like Princeton on a day like this? There are endless questions about the death of Sissy Stewart. But answers, evidence, hard facts, even reliable memories seem elusive in this case. And that's why we're diving into it today, 35 years later. Because her killer has never answered for the crime. Because it's a case that still haunts some, while others, even some people who knew her, seem satisfied to see it fade from memory and newspaper headlines.
It's circumstantial, but it's very strong circumstantial.
I mean, nobody just walks up the road and stabs somebody.
I'm not comfortable saying who was eliminated at this point because it is still open.
When they can identify that person with 100% accuracy, you can ask me that question then, and I'll tell you exactly what the motive is.
This is In the Shadow of Princeton, a podcast from NJ.com and the Star Ledger. I'm Rebecca Everett.
And I'm Kevin Shea. I've been a beat reporter here in Mercer County, New Jersey for more than 20 years. And I've been asking questions about this case the entire time. I just can't let it go.
I know, you've been following this case since I was in the 7th grade?
Yeah, and I thought I knew it pretty well. But now that we've spent 8 months digging into the case, I realize that what's been publicly reported doesn't even scratch the surface.
Absolutely. It's a maddening, twisting, decades-long journey that investigators have been on. Almost Zodiac-esque. And that's how I felt as we peeled back layers of this case for our own investigation. One day, I'm sure I know what happened, and then a source's next sentence completely contradicts it. And then, just when I'm ready to tear my hair out, you, Kevin, get a call from an FBI boss who's been dodging you for 5 months. And we're back in the chase.
So after peeling back all those layers, we're telling the full story, really for the first time. The story of Sissy Stewart, a woman who spoke her mind and held her own.
The story of how she was murdered and hidden with a pocket knife and a padlock by a killer who left nothing behind for desperate investigators to cling to.
The story of 1989 Princeton, where today's masters of the universe were students buying shitty weed and fake IDs.
And where one group of friends would much later end up under a police microscope for a wild weekend they either can't remember or don't want to.
The story of 2 dedicated investigators who over 2 decades considered theories from a Whitney Houston stalker to a violent serial prowler to the explanation you usually only see in crime thrillers.
A conspiracy involving Sissy's own family, possibly with the help of a Princeton University student who'd later become a prominent figure. In reporting this project, we reached over 100 sources and interviewed 60 of them, including former investigators who dug up old notes and shared their hopes that this case will be solved. But we've gotten a different reaction from some of those who knew Sissy or her family.
Why not just leave it alone? Let it rest. Let her rest. It's ancient history.
But that doesn't sit well with us. I don't think it should sit well with anyone. The bottom line is, someone got away with murder, committed the perfect crime, and walked free.
The first stories reporting Sissy's murder said that she was found by her older sister, Margareta Callenhoven. That's true. But there was another person who went down the basement stairs with Margareta. Sissy's house cleaner. But she's always been kind of a mystery, and she's never spoken publicly about it.
The public never even knew her name, and that's how she wants to keep it.
She was a very nice lady. Why they did this to her is a mystery.
She sat down with us last spring, but she didn't want to be recorded or have her name used. We'll have a voice actor read some of what she told us.
She was 38 at the time of the killing. She cleaned Sissy's house every Tuesday morning for $40.
I came to work that day. I don't know why they let me in knowing the problem. They should have sent me back home.
The problem? Sissy was missing. Her son Jeb and his wife Sheila had been looking for her since Monday. And on Tuesday morning, they were at Sissy's house with her sister Margareta. Jeb and Sheila went to make a missing persons report around 10:30. That left the cleaner alone with Margareta.
The 2 women decided to search the house again, top to bottom.
When we got near the basement door, I said, "Let's go to the basement." And she said, "Oh no, my nephew told me not to go there." I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because it's locked, so how is she going to be there?" I said, "Let's go anyway."
They went down the stairs, and Margareta turned on the main light. The police report sets the grisly scene. The door leading into the smaller back room was ajar. Through it, in the weak light, she could see a body. Her sister's body.
It was horrible. We were both shaking. We forgot the police phone number because you forget everything in that moment.
Before we get to what happens next, we need to introduce you to someone. He's going to be our guide through the first phase of this investigation.
Kevin, I remember when we started making calls to law enforcement on this case, everyone said, "Have you talked to Ralph? You should talk to Ralph."
Ralph Teresiano. I knew his name because he was kind of a legend in the Princeton police because of a 1997 bank robbery. A robber held a woman in a headlock, pointing a gun at her head. They were in an elevator, and when the doors opened, Ralph shot the man and saved the woman.
But he was never one of those cops looking to get his name in the paper. He still isn't now. We did finally get to sit down and interview him. I remember one of the first things he said was that the Stewart case was an open wound.
I don't obsess over it, but it's there. And I mean, a lot of what I told you was taken off notes of an outline I did over 30 years ago that I kept all this time.
He was a tenacious cop, and he's a serious guy. When we talked with him in his study, he sounded like he was testifying in front of a jury. He looks young for his 63 years and now runs his own paving business.
He remembers so much of this fateful Tuesday morning, April 4th, 1989. Sissy's son, Jeb, and his wife, Sheila, were at the police station filling out a missing persons report. That's when the call came into dispatch. The call from Margaretta.
I was told that they found the body unattended and to respond.
And with that, Ralph and the other detectives headed to 34 Mercer Street, where the so-called unattended death was about to become the borough's first homicide in more than a decade.
There was only two ways to get in the basement. From the kitchen, downstairs, I went to the main room of the basement. And then there was an outdoor entrance underneath the porch, which took you to the room where the body was found.
You can see photos of this on our website, as well as a diagram of the room. It's a small space on the southeast end of the basement, roughly 12 by 13 feet. It was dirty and cluttered with items in storage and Sissy's gardening supplies.
I saw Miss Stewart lying there. She was on her right side. There was some dried fluid by her nose and mouth. There was some dark stains on her sweater, which very faint in the back. It was obvious that she was dead. She was pale. There was no chest movements. She was cold to touch.
And the clothes she was wearing? The same clothes she was wearing when she had those Bloody Marys with Doris Mellinger 2 days earlier.
In her right hand, she had a pair of good-sized eyeglasses, big frames. She glued these long pieces of yarn on both sides of them, and she had fishing weights at the end, and that was wrapped very loosely in her right hand. And the clothes were undisturbed. The pockets weren't turned inside out. So initially just laying there, and there's no sign of a struggle.
Right. If there'd been a struggle, you're not still holding on to your glasses.
Those glasses would have broke.
Yeah.
Sissy's body was lying across an electrical cord, pulled partly from the socket. So electrocution seemed at least possible to the detectives. But then the medical examiner arrived. She slid her gloved hand up the back of Sissy's blood-stained sweater. She felt the 5 stab wounds. This was a murder.
Ralph climbed the basement stairs to the first floor, where his captain, Thomas Mashad, was waiting with Sissy's son, Jeb.
When he was told by Mashad that it appeared to be a homicide, and he said, well, of course it is.
And what did investigators have to work with as they tackled their first homicide in more than a decade? A footprint on the dirty floor. Very little in the way of forensic evidence. No murder weapon, 0 witnesses, and few promising leads.
So it's clear that someone wanted her dead, and they didn't want anyone to find her.
But beyond that, nothing has been clear. And we've spent months trying to answer a series of troubling questions. Is this case unsolvable? Was the killing random? Revenge? A robbery gone wrong? A crime of passion? Or to keep Sissy quiet?
And why does it feel like no one besides investigators seems to care?
So I feel like crime movies and true crime always has to have that quirky, old-school beat reporter character. The person who knows everyone in town, works their sources, gets the scoop. In this story in Mercer County, that's not me. I'm a reporter who makes podcasts. I've lived in New Jersey close to 8 years, but I'd never been to Princeton. I mostly cover crime, and there isn't much of it there. But luckily, we have Kevin. He's been the beat reporter here at our sister newspaper, The Times of Trenton, for about 2 decades, covering everything in the county and then driving back to his family on the Jersey Shore, listening to 80s and 90s punk with his surfboard in the back of his van. Through it all, he's wanted to investigate this case. And over Christmas break of 2022, as I was trying to find my next podcast topic, he convinced me. This was it. Here's part of our phone call. So tell me about your meeting. It sounds exciting.
Yeah, so I met with this person yesterday, and I learned more about this case than I ever have. It's a lot of information, and it goes back to the day of the crime, until years later when it was reinvestigated in 2003, and it's eye-opening to me. It really is.
It was either this call when you hooked me, or it was when you met me on New Year's Eve in an outlet mall parking lot with a stack of leaked documents you'd finally got your hands on.
Yeah, and it only took 25 years. So the Times of Trenton covered the 10-year anniversary of Sissy Stewart's death in 1999, and I was new at the paper. It was such a mystery. I asked police about it for years, and eventually, one of them surprised me completely by just telling me, by the way, this is who we think did it. It felt like he kind of saddled me with it. Like, here's the answer, your move.
So when we started this project, you could get these law enforcement sources to talk. But usually when you're reporting on cold cases, the victim's family is talking too. They're glad to get the story out there. But in this case, it felt like the opposite.
Yeah, which was unusual. We tried to talk to everyone in Sissy's family who knew her well or could tell her story. Most never returned our calls or letters. A few did, but they declined to talk to us.
Jeb Stewart died in 2007. His son, Craig, declined to be interviewed through his attorney. Sissy's other son, filmmaker Charles Stewart, wouldn't do an interview. Decades ago, he actually made a documentary about Sissy's death, which we were excited to see. But he told us we couldn't use any audio from it.
So our usual process, interviewing relatives to learn everything we can about Sissy, that wasn't going to work. But we watched this documentary. We dove into the newspaper archives, and we talked to former neighbors.
Her first name was actually Emily, but she was better known by her childhood nickname Sissy. Her family moved to Princeton when she was 10, and other than going to college at Bryn Mawr and Wellesley, she lived there the rest of her life. Most of it at 34 Mercer Street, where she raised her 2 boys and then lived alone after her husband left in 1965.
News stories said she was kind of a Johnny Appleseed around Princeton. You could be walking along downtown and see this 5'5" gray-haired lady sprinkling California poppy seeds in random spots she thought needed a little sprucing up.
That's pretty awesome. And kids in town knew her as Mary Poppins or the Wicked Witch from community theater.
You might be thinking that a woman who grew up when girls debuted in society would be preoccupied with etiquette and all that. But by all accounts, Sissy was not a quiet, tea-drinking granny. A word that came up a few times was feisty.
She wasn't shrinking from anything. She shoveled her own walk, split her own wood, and spoke her mind.
The Asbury Park Press quoted a friend who said Sissy was forthright. They'd argue about feminism and women in the workforce. Sissy went to church 4 days a week, but also said damn and hell. And her pastor said she'd let him know if he, quote, preached a lemon.
That's one of my favorite stories about her. I also tracked down a family that grew up around the corner from Sissy in the 60s, the Tomlinsons. I interviewed Sarah, whose last name is now Fuller, and her bird tried to get in on the interview too.
Parrot in the background, so if you hear whistling, that's my parrot.
I was hearing some whistling.
Yeah, he's downstairs. You won't hear him much. But I will say she was just an extremely nice person. I recall her as being very almost manly and capable. I mean, I picture her as someone in a pair of overalls or blue jeans with clippers in her back pocket, working on her flowers.
Sarah couldn't forget Sissy. Mrs. Stewart was the one who helped her as a kid when Sarah's Yorkshire Terrier got hit by a car.
She ended up helping me get a blanket and pick the dog up and take it home. We just lived around the corner, but I didn't know her that well, but I just thought I can call on her. because she's sort of got a can-do attitude and she'll help me.
She could be both fierce and kind. That's something we also heard from Angelo Onofre, the current Mercer County prosecutor. He remembered it from the case file that still sits in his office today.
Mrs. Stewart was always described as a very caring person, but she loved an argument. And the way that her sisters always described it was she'd argue about anything. But once you were done, everything was forgotten and they were family again. They also said she was a very trusting person, that if someone came to the door, there was an example, if, a religious group came to the door, she'd be the kind of person that would let them in and talk to them and then give her opinion.
Sissy looked out for her neighbors and was, kind of surprisingly for Princeton, concerned about crime. Articles said she was one of only a few residents to show up for a community crime watch meeting the year before she died.
Then in April of 1989, there was a community crime meeting because she died. Police and a local social worker wanted to help neighbors deal with the trauma and fear from the unexplainable murder of a prominent woman.
It sort of defied all the stereotypes during the day, on the weekend, sunny, people out and about, all those things we don't associate with vulnerability.
This is that social worker, Rebecca Winborn. She said when I called, her pulse quickened because she could remember the feeling after the killing. Horror, even terror.
I looked it up yesterday, and Easter was actually the week before. But there was this kind of sense of this tragedy in this beauty, that combination of the season, and she had been out gardening. It wasn't a time of rebirth, it was a time of death somehow.
People had a false sense of security, she said. Like things like this just couldn't happen in Princeton, especially not a block from campus.
And I can definitely believe it. It isn't just that Princeton is quiet and affluent. It feels like the university lends a sort of wholesomeness to the town.
I remember the first time I went there, it was pouring rain, and I was still struck by how beautiful it is. You have these idyllic estates and mansions, and then you drive into the center, and it looks like if you wanted to build a movie set of a picturesque, classic American downtown.
In 1989, the last murder had been 11 years earlier. It was solved overnight, literally. The attacker called the police himself to report he'd stabbed someone.
But the killing of Sissy Stewart, the idea of a crazed killer on the loose, it was deeply disturbing to this little town.
Another neighbor who knew Sissy, Jeremiah Ford III, told me it was like the queen of the neighborhood had been assassinated.
The idea of a murder in that community was one thing, but the murder of somebody who was such a nice, loving person was devastating. It didn't ring true at all. It just was absolutely bizarre and weird to think that somebody would go into the basement and kill that woman. For what?
Thomas Michaud joined the Princeton Police Department in 1966.
But in Princeton, it was not the swinging 60s.
We used to comment you could shoot a cannon down the main street at midnight and never hit a thing.
But things changed. And by the time he was Captain Michaud, in 1989, instead of a burglary or a robbery, the case before him was a murder. He said it hit him pretty early on, that this was not going to be an easy case to solve.
Maybe it's by happenstance that there was no evidence left behind. Maybe it was by design, but I don't know. I could see how there would be no real physical evidence left behind if someone followed her in, because I don't think anybody dragged her down there. I think maybe someone followed her in, attacked her, and left. And they could have done all of that without leaving a trace. And that's what happened.
Without leaving a trace. That doesn't sound very promising, Kevin.
Nope, but they weren't completely in the dark. One thing they did have was a pretty small window for time of death. Remember, Bloxy Baker was driving by and saw Sissy gardening that Sunday around 4:30 or 5.
Right, and you assume she wasn't gardening after sunset at 7, so the time of death was about 5 to 7 p.m.
And there were some clues from the crime scene.
So let's get into that now. What they could glean from the horrible scene they found.
No murder weapon. But the autopsy did reveal some things about the knife and how Sissy was killed.
We won't be overly gruesome here. Ralph is pretty matter-of-fact about it. But we're talking about how a woman died. So it is disturbing.
There was 5 stab wounds. They were horizontal. It started from the lower neck, upper back. The top one went through the 5th vertebrae and it severed 3/4 of an inch of the spinal cord, which would have caused immediate paralysis. The other wounds, which were a succession right below that, one punctured a lung, the other, I believe, punctured the other lung, and then it punctured the victim's aorta. So that would have caused her to bleed to death within 1 to 2 minutes.
He told us a few other key things, like that Sissy had a bruise on her forehead, probably from falling forward when she was stabbed. And the knife was likely pretty small. The medical examiner guessed the blade was about 2.5 inches long, based on the wounds.
The wounds, the way they were horizontal, so the ME felt that the victim may have been leaning over and the attacker was standing on her side when the stabbing occurred. Because they were horizontal, and holding a knife, not many people hold knives sideways.
I remember Ralph explaining that to us and trying to picture it, but it's such a terrible thing to picture. And also to think, how could someone inflict such deadly wounds with a 2.5-inch blade?
That's about as long as my thumb. So I think of a pocket knife. And maybe it could be someone who carried a pocket knife and just acted on impulse that day?
I know, we've talked in circles about all the possibilities. Like Ralph's report said Sissy left a work glove and a rake on a tree stump, and a glove and a spade by the cellar door. So maybe she was raking and heard something in the basement and went to check it out?
Or even simpler, she just went in to grab something from the cellar and a stranger followed her in?
Ralph said police thought the lack of commotion or struggle could be a sign that she knew and trusted her attacker.
Whoever it was, she was pretty comfortable turning her back on him.
But it's also possible she was just surprised, right? Because this is a woman who would defend herself. So what else did police have?
So they wanted to know if anything had been taken, but the family had walked through the house and said nothing appeared disturbed. There were a few dollars in Sissy's wallet on the table, and her jewelry was untouched.
Someone had noticed a beer bottle in the sink, but Sissy's friend, Doris Mellinger, said Sissy might have had a beer after their Bloody Marys.
So there were no definitive signs that she had invited anyone into her home after Doris left.
No, but you and I have talked about how the house itself wasn't a particularly well-preserved crime scene. Because the family had been searching the house for a day, and the house cleaner had been cleaning it.
Okay, so now we need to dig into the doors.
Right, the 2 locked basement doors. There's one from the kitchen. She always kept that one locked. So there's no reason to think someone else locked it.
The other door was an exterior door that led from the basement into the yard.
And through the investigation, the various interviews, we learned that that lock the victim would keep closed but not shut, just to give the appearance that it was locked.
So it looks like from far away that the door's locked, but she never actually clicks the padlock shut.
Except that day, someone did lock it. Someone who really didn't want anyone to find her body.
So inside that cellar space, the New Jersey State Police CSI team was trying to find any evidence they couldn't see, dusting for fingerprints and using a laser to find fibers. They took a cast of a footprint on the dirty floor.
Ralph said the most promising thing the CSI team found were 3 fingerprints on the house's side door. But they ended up being Jeb Stewart's prints.
Which makes sense, because he had been searching the house for his mom.
Kevin actually tracked down a few of these CSI team members.
After the tone.
Hello?
Hey, is this Jim?
Yes.
Jim, it's Kevin Shea again from NJ.com.
How you doing, Kevin?
Good. Jim Principe is retired now, but he was a detective sergeant on that CSI team. He didn't remember all the specifics of scouring the basement, But there was no way he was forgetting this case.
We've been in the unit for quite a long time, and it was a puzzlement to us. And it was just, like I said, a ghost came in there, did what it had to, and left nothing.
They only worked this scene for a day, but they remain haunted by this crime.
I took it personal, and it was just the type of thing where that poor woman didn't deserve it. I mean, nobody really deserves to die. But it just seemed like it was like a grandmother type of thing for me, and it was just like, why? There was no reason for it.
I could tell how much it still bothers him that he couldn't give investigators the clues they needed to put this killer away.
I get that frustration, because we've been digging into this case for 8 months, and every time I think a clear picture is emerging, something else pops up and makes me question everything. Like when we heard there was a piece of evidence straight out of a mystery novel. A Princeton student's senior thesis that an investigator thought sounded awfully similar to what happened to Sissy. But the truth we found buried in the stacks of Princeton's library was something else entirely.
And as frustrating as it was, I can definitely say we've uncovered more about this story than I could have hoped.
More unbelievable discoveries and developments than have ever been publicly reported.
In this podcast, we'll lay out everything we found and what it points to. We'll take you through the 2 major phases of the investigation.
And we'll talk about what's happened lately, since we started asking questions about this case.
We have details pulled from dozens of interviews and decades-old police notes, and new opinions from FBI profilers about some leading police theories.
Like the young man from Haiti, accused of being a serial stabber. Or the unstable woman who was dismissed as nonviolent, but after fighting to obtain police records, we know that's not true.
And we're going to share how and why some cops have come to suspect someone close to Sissy. Very close.
And you're going to meet Tony Federico, a larger-than-life character, the Ahab in this Byzantine Moby Dick tale.
Tony Federico was the cop who took the missing persons report for Sissy Stewart back in 1989. When I knew him, he was a captain and then police chief. He was a big guy, looked great in a suit with a big personality. I remember shaking his hand, and his big hand would engulf mine. He was very friendly, but he could also be intimidating and commanding.
Tony was a go-getter.
Tony could be colorful too, so, he was, when he was frustrated.
Addicted to his work and job and wanting to get things right. At the same time, great sense of humor.
That was just kind of him, where it's just a big laugh.
Tony Federico would eventually become obsessed with solving Sissy's murder. It never sat well with him that this horrible case in his hometown was unsolved.
But it wasn't till he was 50, hair turned gray, that he could really throw his weight around and say, I'm the captain and I'm investigating this case now. He wasn't a detective, so it was pretty unusual. And I think you can say he worked it in a pretty unusual fashion.
I remember him telling me, really animated, how one day he'd hold a press conference and reveal who killed Sissy Stewart. But he never got to do it. He died suddenly in 2009 at his lake house in Maine.
It seemed like the case kind of died with him.
Yeah, I just wish he was here to walk us through it. We did get to meet his son, Anthony Federico Jr., who everyone in Princeton calls Little Tony. We met at the Nassau Diner.
Because you can't have a podcast in New Jersey without meeting someone in a diner, right?
Here's us talking with Little Tony last spring.
How often would he talk about it?
He would go through cycles where he would be working on the case intensely, and during that time, that's all he could talk about. Then, he had other things to do and had to put it on the back burner for a little while, but it was always there. He was always tinkering on it. He had his own personal file. Actually, I think it's still up in Maine. I have to look.
You definitely have to look.
Yeah. I have all my dad's personal effects up in Maine. I'm actually going up there May 8th for a week for turkey season. So
the possibility of a treasure trove of documents in a cabin in Maine? You can guess what happens next, right?
As we complete our final safety check,
Please ensure your seatbelt is fastened. Your seat back is upright. Your tray table is put away. Once airborne, we'll be back with more details about our flight.
Coming up on In the Shadow of Princeton.
He was at the house 3 times after he had lunch and never went down to that basement.
I'll tell you now unequivocally, this case will be solved.
He was in an absolute panic. He knew he lied.
I think he was the classic Albert Hitchcock killer.
In the Shadow of Princeton is a production of NJ Advance Media. Reporting is by me and Rebecca Everett. Rebecca wrote and produced the podcast. Christopher Kelly and Jeff Roberts are executive producers.
Our sound engineer and composer is Blake Maples. James Shapiro is our associate audio engineer.
Our voice actor is Natalie Patterson. Our website was designed by Alaa Salim.
Special thanks to all our sources who agreed to talk to us. You can visit theprincetonmurder.com for more about the story, including photos and other extras. And you can email us at inbox@theprincetonmurder.com.
Follow In the Shadow of Princeton. And if you're enjoying it, please rate and review it and help us spread the word.